Yesterday marked the 60-year reunion of the Brown versus Board of Education trial. And basically, in a nutshell, what the trial was about blacks and whites integrating in schools. And I'm sure you guys, or you guys that know somewhat of your history, know the Little Rock, Arkansas kids that were bused to an all white school and the trials and tribulations they had to go through. And just in general, it basically was saying that it denied blacks their constitutional rights by having a equal but separate type of format of how kids were educated in the 50s, and it was an ongoing trial. And finally it came to a decision to where blacks were able to integrate a lot of white schools. But speeding up to now, 60 years later, when I take a look at what was going on back then and what's going on right now, it's not too big of a difference. Yes, we have black kids that can go to school, white kids, and there's I would say somewhat more opportunities out there for so-called minorities to get educated, or the ability to just vibe with people who are different from you. And I think that's very important. One of the things that I learned in college that I thought was just beneficial for me as a person is getting to know people from different religions, different nationalities, people that have different cultures. Even integrating with white folks who weren't too fond of black people, because even with that, you get some type of education on how people think here in this country. So I always think it's good for you to step outside of your box. Don't just hang around people, speak to people who are black or who are white or who are Hispanic. Always branch out and meet different type of people. So I think when you look at it from that point of view, it is a good thing. But not too much has changed, because when we look at a lot of our school systems now, a lot of the communities are very segregated. We have gentrification going on. White flight, where white people moving out of certain communities, or the city and the government have, what they've done is they try to create transitional housing, or build so-called projects in certain type of communities that might have been predominantly white. And what's happened is that we all know how white people are. When it's a bunch of Negroes around, if they can afford to leave, they're gonna leave. It's always been like that since the beginning of time. So when we look at that, and then we look at the educational system and how racism and white supremacy is being practiced within the educational system in the so-called inner cities or the hood or whatever. Not too much of this stuff has changed. And you look at a state like California. I'm in LA, and a lot of people talk about how it's so diverse here, and everybody gets along, which is complete bullshit. Because yes, California is very diverse when it comes to certain nationalities and people from different cultures, but at the same time, this is the first place you should look at when we talk about segregation. When we look at people who are grouped in certain communities, like lower end of LA, or the Crenshaw district, South Central, Watts, and then you look at cities like Woodland Hills and Thousand Oaks and Chatsworth. Those are predominantly white communities. So things are still being put into place to keep people in a certain community. They don't want a certain group of people that they have certain judgments on moving into a white community, because how white people look at a lot of things is that they're looking at, like, well, if too many Hispanics or too many black people move into my community, it's going to bring my property value down. It's going to it's going to tear up the community. My community is not going to have, I would say, the prestigious type of title that it has at the moment if too many so-called minorities start moving into the community. So what happens then is that you have a lot of people who will start moving, or they start going to the civil council meetings, or going to the city, those who run the city, and they start complaining. And with that, a lot of people might say, Well, it's not our fault that blacks can't move into a middle class community, which they can, but systematically a lot of blacks are cast out of those communities due to poor educational resources, lack of jobs, and so on and so on, racism, white supremacy, so on and so on. So a lot of people might use that argument. Well, it's not our fault that kids in the middle class or upper class community have more resources or have better education. But people with that type of mindset don't look at the fact that we have things like racism that's constructing things to keep blacks and it's people who are identified as so-called minorities in those conditions. It's hard for a black kid to come out of those type of conditions and make it to the middle class or upper class community because of the different tactics that are put into place. And what's happening is that a lot of these kids that are going to school in these inner cities or whatever, it's lack of resource. They don't have the same resources that a school in the middle class area will have or the upper class community. They don't have those same resources. So what's happening is that they're being deprived of having a full, well-rounded education. Then you have teachers who are coming into these communities and basically just collecting a paycheck. And I don't know how it is in certain states, but out here in California, actually California has a law where I believe if you pass your I believe there's a test. I'm not 100% sure on it, but there's a test that teachers have to take when you are applying to teach in California. Once you pass a test in California, you're able to go anywhere across the country and be able to teach. But teachers get paid more money and they get tax breaks from teaching in a community like Compton or certain parts of Long Beach or Watts or South Central. So you have a lot of these teachers that don't give a damn about the students, don't care about actually teaching these children, coming to these schools and basically collecting the paycheck. And that's a big problem. We have a lot of no good teachers that don't give a damn about these kids, and they're just basically coming there to collect the check. And who ends up paying for it in the long run is the kids. So segregation is still going on within the educational field, and I'm not really with the whole we need to be integrated in order to have a better chance. I know a lot of people say, well, I want to move my family to a middle class or upper class area because the schools are better. I totally understand that. But at the same time, even though I think that it's good for people to branch out and get to know people of different ethnicities, at the same time, I don't think that we need to necessarily be integrated with white people in order to have an education. I think what the real issue is that it's lack of resources. We need to have the same opportunities, the same tools, the same resources that a school in the middle class or upper class community has. So I think that's the real underlying issue. It's not about necessarily we have to join white people in order to have some type of stature, because I think a lot of times within the black community, we think that we have to look, speak, and have a demeanor and live in a white community in order to be accepted. And it's really a slavery type of mindset where we feel like if we're not living around white people or we don't conduct ourselves or act like white people to a certain extent, we're not accepted. We're not human beings. We're just niggas. And I think that's an issue that a lot of people don't talk about out here. But you have a lot of people that have an identity crisis, and they feel like if they don't take on white characteristics, they don't live in a white community, that they're less than. But that's basically my opinion on this whole Brown versus Board of Education. Yeah, we have some, opportunities that we didn't have back then, but at the same time, we got a long way to go. And like I've said before, racism is institutionalized nowadays. It's not, we still see it, but it's not, Klan members coming on your yard, burning a cross. So, you walking down the street and somebody hollering out nigga. Does that happen? Yes. But a lot of people are scared they'll get the shit knocked out of them. So what's been put into place now is institutionalized racism. They're hitting the the educational lane. They're hitting society. They're practicing white supremacy and racism through the excuse me, I lost my train of mind. Excuse me, the prison industrial complex. So it's more institutionalized. It's more undercover. A lot of these people that practice these type of mindsets are you know, your government officials, or the police department, or people who are teaching your children right now. And that's why it's important that we educate our own children. You know, don't just teach them about, you know, Christopher Columbus or the so-called United States standards of what your child should be educated on. Let them know about their culture. You know, my man Tariq Nasheed is coming out with a movie, Hidden Colors 3. You know, take your kids to go see that, because I think it's very important that we start to educate our especially this young generation, because a lot of these kids are lost. It's very important that we start educating our children on their culture and who they are, so that when they see things on TV or you know, people in society try to manipulate them or use them to coon and buffoon or sell their soul for the dollar bill, they are aware. They know how to catch the bullshit before it's thrown upon them. But that's my opinion on this. You guys give me your feedback. I will leave a link in the description box if you guys want to read more on the Brown versus Board of Education trial. I'm out. You know, like I said before, let's get educated.